What kind of chicken was it?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Matsuri Takahashi was a vivacious 24-year-old account manager at Japan's largest advertising agency. Like many of her colleagues, she considered herself lucky to have landed such a prestigious job. The work was interesting, the money was great, the opportunities limitless. On Christmas Day 2015, Matsuri carefully slid open the window of her Tokyo office and hurled herself 23 stories to the street below. Interestingly, the coroner refused to label her death a suicide. Instead, he used a Japanese word, karoshi, which roughly translates as death from overwork. Apparently, in addition to her already long hours, Matsuri had been forced to work 100 hours of unpaid overtime every single month. Consequently, was tired, and the tiredness increasingly took its toll. In Mark chapter 2, we read that one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the cornfields, and his disciples walked along with him, picking ears of corn as they went. Now, the word Sabbath comes from an old Hebrew word, Shabbat. Shabbat means to rest. And the word rest, I would suggest, in our busy, addicted culture, is extraordinarily beautiful. Let's say it together. Rest. You work hard all day and you come home and you look forward to having a
Rest.
You work your guts out all week, putting up with your boss and your colleagues and all the nonsense. And you look forward to putting your feet up and having and a wine, yes. It's beautiful, is it not? Beautiful. Now, the concept of Sabbath comes from the fourth of the 10 Commandments, which says, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all of your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work." And during Jesus' lifetime, this commandment was regarded as being one of the most important concepts in the entire Bible. So important that the rabbis who lived around the time of Jesus offered prolific guidance on what a person could and could not do on this very crucial day of rest. This guidance eventually evolved into rules, and these rules eventually became limitless. For example, there's a whole section in the Mishnah, this is a collection of teachings from rabbis, that lists 39 activities. Each activity has sections and subsections that were regarded as work and therefore against the rules on the day of rest. For example, tying a knot was thought to be work and therefore against the rules. Sewing more than one stitch on an item of clothing was thought to be work and therefore against the rules. Walking for more than 1,999 steps on the Sabbath was thought to be work and therefore against the rules. These rules just went on and on and on. In Jesus' day, there was no question regarding the day of rest that the religious leaders did not have some kind of answer for. For example, have a look at this line from the Mishnah. This is a rule. If a building falls down on the Sabbath, enough rubble may be removed to discover if any victims are dead or alive. If alive, they may be rescued, but if dead, the corpses must be left until the Sabbath is over. Talk about covering the bases. You can just imagine where this rule came from. There was some religious conference somewhere, and some guy puts up his hand and says, "Yeah, I have a question." "Yes, Johnson, what's your question?" "We don't have a rule covering the eventuality of when buildings fall down, and we just don't know what to do. Our religion can't cope unless we come up with this rule." And so they come up. There was rules for absolutely everything. And if you were really good at knowing what all these rules were and good at doing them, then you were thought to be in. You were okay. However, if you weren't so good at knowing what all these rules were and certainly weren't so good at doing them, then you were thought to be out. So 2 things to notice in this opening sentence then. First of all, it was against the rules to walk for more than 1,999 paces on the Sabbath day. Jesus and his disciples are having a journey. Who's keeping a note of the steps? Second thing to notice, it was against the rules to harvest crops on the Sabbath. Jesus and his disciples are picking ears of corn, presumably to eat them. And what I find fascinating about this is that no sooner are the rules broken than who should appear on the scene but the rule keepers. Ain't that always the way? Next sentence. The Pharisees said, "Look." That's the word, isn't it? Look. Here's what I've noticed in your life. Ever had someone say that to you? Here's what I've observed. Why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? I think here Mark invites us to place ourselves within the story and see which side of the debate we are on. And sometimes in Mark's Gospel that is an uncomfortable thing to look at. When I was a much younger man, when I was at Bible college, I lived in a house with 8 other guys who were also at Bible college. And among those 8 guys, I was by far the best Christian. I used to think Christianity was like that. It was like karate. There was white belts and brown belts and black belts. And the reason I knew I was the best Christian was because every single morning, 7 days a week, I got out of my bed at 5 o'clock and I read my Bible. I was a student. I read my Bible for an hour till 6 o'clock. And then at 6 o'clock I closed my Bible and I prayed for an hour. And so by the time my lazy, less Christian friends had got out of bed, I'd already been super Christian for 2 hours. Which is probably okay as an activity. But for the remaining 22 hours of the day, I felt superior to everyone else. And in my superiority was very skilled at doing what the Pharisees are doing here. Looking, noticing, and seeing all of the many ways in which everyone else wasn't quite up to my black belt levels of Christianity. You see, there's something about keeping the rules that causes you to notice when other people aren't. And I think this is often why the most quote-unquote Christian people are, once you peel back the veneer, some of the nastiest human beings you will ever meet. And so you notice in Mark's story that the Pharisees have this habit of being like religious jack-in-the-boxes who seem to pop out from behind a bush at the exact moment when someone isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing. They are like your mother when you were a teenager. Always catching you, always seeing what you were up to. And this is what's happening in verse 24. Insofar as Jesus and his disciples are not obeying the day of rest, their legitimacy as persons of faith must be called into question. Next sentence. Jesus answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which only priests are allowed to eat." So here Jesus is referring to an obscure event in the Old Testament in which David and his followers were on the run. And one day, in hunger and desperation, they go into the temple, which was against the rules, and they eat some holy bread, which was against the rules. And when Jesus says this, he's not giving the Pharisees an Old Testament lesson. He's not saying, well, David did this when he was hungry, so it's okay for me to do this now because I'm hungry. He's saying something quite offensive. In popular understanding, David is Israel's greatest Messiah. He's the great king in the past, who they are looking forward to coming again in the future. And so at the time of Jesus, David's memory is cherished in religious circles. In fact, at the end of every single service in the synagogue, they used to say in a prayer, "Cause the branch of thy servant David to rise again." They looked forward to David coming. And so when Jesus talks this way, he's drawing a comparison between David in the past and himself in the present, which is highly offensive to the Pharisees, because in their mind, the Messiah was going to validate the extensive rules of their religion, not flout them. Regarding those rules then, Jesus says, and here we're getting to the point, the Sabbath, the rest, the ceasing, the stopping, the taking a break from your busy, addicted life, that was made for man, and not the other way around. The Sabbath, I think everyone would agree, is a beautiful concept. It was meant to make life better, not worse. There is, after all, nothing troubling at all about the concept of rest. But over the years, the good concept of God's rest had become perverted into life-sucking rules. And so the day of rest became something that you didn't look forward to. It became a burden, not a joy. And so in verse 27, Jesus is saying you're wrong. You've taken this thing that's meant to make life better and you've made it into something that sucks the life out of everyone. Like, just take that one rule about the 1,999 steps. Just take that one thing. This is in an age before Fitbits and apps. Can you imagine how unrestful it must have been to keep a running tally of the number of footsteps you walked in a day? Always making sure you kept enough in reserve so you could get from the sofa to the bed at night. Insanely perverse. Following the death of Matsuri Takahashi, major corporations around the world began to revisit their attitude to overwork. Ironically, this only served to reveal how twisted our culture had become. For example, the investment bank Goldman Sachs capped the number of hours that interns were allowed to work. The premise of this capping was good. They reasoned that a tired employee was not an efficient employee. And tired, inefficient employees were not profitable. So they wanted to create a rested workspace. A workspace where everyone was refreshed and not at all tired when they were doing their important work. So they came up with a rule that limited the number of hours an intern could work. And the number was 17 a day. You may show up for work, they actually said this, you can show up for work at 7 o'clock in the morning, but you must leave by midnight. You wonder what on earth was going on at the company beforehand. One of the most popular business gurus on YouTube is a man called Gary Vaynerchuk. Many of you will follow him, and most of you will have heard of him. Great guy with a simple message that resonates in our busy, addicted culture. He basically says if you want to succeed in life, you need to work longer and harder than your competition. That's it. Just work longer and work harder than everyone else, and you'll get there. He regularly tells his viewers that his workday is typically 18 hours. So that's why I succeed. I work 18 hours a day, longer and harder than my competition. All of this raises an awkward question for me. There you are. You landed yourself a job at Goldman Sachs in Manhattan. Prestigious. There you are. You're running a $100 million company. Not bad. But if you are working 18 hours a day, in what sense are you winning at life? In what sense are you anything that anyone should want to emulate? And more importantly, if you have achieved so much with so little rest, how much more would you achieve if you worked less and rested more? How much more could you achieve if your brain was less tired and more focused? At one time or another, we've probably all said that we get so much more done if we didn't have to sleep. If you're anything like me, when you were a student, you probably experimented with pulling an all-nighter every now and again to eliminate the unproductive sleeping hours. No doubt during busy spells in your life, you've certainly tried shaving an hour off your sleep in the evening or an hour in the morning so you can get more done. The problem with this is that literally every piece of research on the subject suggests that resting and sleeping and switching off are vital for peak performance. For example, they did an experiment on NBA players, and they took a group of them and they forced them to have 10 hours of sleep a night. I don't know how you force someone to have 10 hours of sleep at night, but I'd be up for such a forcing. Anyway. So they forced these guys to sleep for 10 hours a night. One of the results of this experiment was that their three-point shooting average increased by 9%. What would a 9% increase make? What difference would a 9% increase make to whatever it is you do for a living? It's not nothing. The Center for Disease Control in America have said that tiredness and lack of sleep is now so bad in North America that it should be labelled a public health epidemic. In 2009, 250,000 road traffic accidents were directly caused by tiredness. It's the #1 cause of friendly fire deaths in combat zones and was the major contributing factor to Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and the Air France crash that killed 288 people in the South Atlantic. I think that one of the biggest mistakes we most routinely make in life is to underinvest in ourselves. You know that speech they always give you on planes? How does it go? In the event of an emergency, please make sure you put your own oxygen mask on first before you try and help everyone else around you. You know that speech? Well, there's a reason for that. And the reason is, if you can't breathe, you're useless to everyone else. And yet, we are so addicted to busy, so addicted to more, so addicted to fast, that we leave ourselves no room to breathe. And we give freely, without thinking, pieces of ourselves away all the time. We give pieces of ourselves to our partners, to our kids, to our parents, to our clients, to our customers, to our boss, to our employees, and that's all fine. But we keep nothing for ourselves, and we get more and more tired and more run down. And eventually we end up like some old squeezed lemon with all the juice gone and nothing left to give. And then what? Then what good are we? Then what do we have to contribute? The best asset that you have is yourself. And if you consistently underinvest in you, you will damage your ability to make your highest contribution to the only life you'll ever have. And it's such a waste. Remember that study made famous in Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Outliers, that said it takes 10,000 hours to get good at anything? So this was based on a famous study that looked at a group of highly successful people who played the violin. So these were people who landed jobs at the top orchestras, who consistently performed at the very, very highest level. And one of the things the researchers discovered was that every single one of these violinists had clocked up at least 10,000 hours of practice time. Hence the point was made, and you all heard about it in all sorts of contexts. It takes 10,000 hours of practice to get good at anything. Fair enough. But one of the lesser known facts about this same study was that it revealed that the top performing violinists also get on average 8.6 hours of sleep every single night, and on average nap for 40 minutes every single afternoon. Sleep and rest, it seems, are one of the things that allow us to function at our highest possible level. So in one study at Lübeck University in Germany, the students were divided into two groups. One group was given 8 hours of sleep a night for a period of time, and another group was given less than that, and the sleep they got was poor quality. Following this, they were then asked to complete a study. The students who got the 8 hours of sleep a night were twice as likely to complete the puzzle as their sleep-deprived counterparts. So what the Bible says rings true for me, and it rings true in life. Rest is good. rest is not an inconvenience. Rest is necessary. Rest is what we were made to need. It makes us work and live and experience life at the best level. This presumably is why Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, insists on getting 8 hours every single night. So Jesus in this story, he's on the side of rest. He's on the side of doing nothing for a while. The Pharisees, they filled that rest with rules. So Jesus is, the day of rest is supposed to be a day of nothing, a day of empty, a day of space. The Pharisees are, the day of rest is a day full of activities and rules and regulations. It's space versus full. It's space versus full. Then in chapter 3, things come to a head. Another time he went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. So it's another Sabbath. It's another day when God's people in their culture are meant to come together to rest and to celebrate their faith and to just be together, and that's so good and so refreshing. However, when you're already perfect and you already know all the answers, you don't need to rest and celebrate. You just need to notice ways in which everyone else isn't as good as you. So instead of taking part in what's going on, the Pharisees are there to watch with notebooks, desperately hoping that Jesus will slip up. He's done so in the past. It's likely he'll do so again in the future. Sure enough, Jesus says, "Oh, why not?" He says to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand in front of everyone." Then Jesus turns to the Pharisees with their notebooks and says to them, "Which is lawful on the day of rest? To do good or evil? To save or to kill?" Now Jesus, of course, could have healed this man some other time, some other place. He didn't need to offend his critics, but his offence is deliberate. He's deliberately taking the role of an agent provocateur in this sentence and saying, I know you're here to see if I'll break your Sabbath rules, but before I do break your rules, I need you to think about what's going on here. Which is best, to do good or evil? Like stop for a second and see what is going on in front of you. Is good evil or best? Is saving best or is killing best? Right, so for Jesus and us as readers of the story, the only headline in this episode is there's a guy in church who desperately needs some help. That's all that's going on. But the Pharisees do not see what is so obvious in front of them because there is no space in their head. Their head is too full with whatever it is it's full with. In their case, their rules and their regulations and their obsessions. And because their head is too full and has so little space, they don't see this thing that everyone else can see. Think of your head like a traffic jam. Traffic, as you know, works best when there's space between the cars. The more space, the greater the flow. However, when there is less space between the cars, the traffic slows up. And when there is no space between cars, you get gridlock. The same, it seems, is true in our brains. The less space we have, the less we're able to think. And the less we're able to think, the less solutions we come up with, the less ideas we have. So, for example, you may have noticed that when you're in the shower, your mind wanders. And when it wanders, interesting things start to happen. Your thoughts flow seamlessly from one subject to another, from what you've got to do at work that day, to what you're having for breakfast, to what you forgot to buy at the grocery store. And every now and again, when your mind is wandering, bingo, you have a good idea. You have an answer. You have a solution to something that's been bothering you. You may also have noticed that exactly the opposite happens when you're playing Candy Crush or looking at websites. The reason for this is because when your brain is full, it's full. And it's not meant to be full 100% of the time. This is one of the reasons why Steven Spielberg said that smartphones were one of the worst things that happened to creativity. Do you remember what it was like to be bored? Do you remember that? Do you remember you used to go to the airport and you know, it was like you were trapped for 2 hours and there was nothing to do and you were bored. You just had to sit there and endure the nothingness and the people watching and the thinking. Well, now those days have gone. Now when you're bored, when you're standing in a queue for 5 minutes or when you're in the, you know, you're waiting for whatever, you just whip your smartphone out of your pocket and you have instant entertainment. You got games, you can see what the weather's doing in Azerbaijan, you can look at photos of yak herders in Mongolia. It's awesome. But it fills our brain. It fills our brain. And when our brain is full, we don't think. And when we don't think, we don't have ideas and we don't have solutions. We've trained our brains not to be bored and to crave whatever dopamine hit we need from an app or a website, or we can't endure even 5 minutes of nothing anymore. And it makes us worse, not better. In 2010, the founders of Instagram had hit a brick wall. They'd burned through almost 100% of their $500,000 seed money they got, and they were struggling to distinguish their product in a market flooded with sharing apps. So in frustration, almost to the point of giving up, one of the founders says to himself, I just need to get out of here, and he went to Mexico with his girlfriend. He's walking on the beach in Mexico, and there's sand going on, and they're talking about the dog at home, and they're talking about how the cocktails were last night and what they had for dinner and where they might go dancing that night. And from out of the blue, while they were not thinking about work, boom, we need filters on our app. We need to let people filter photos. And from that moment on a beach when they weren't thinking about work to 18 months later, it went from a struggle to a $1 billion company. Sitting hunched over a desk produced some answers? Of course it did. Working harder produced some answers? Of course it did. But the real magic happened when they weren't even thinking about work. We think that the answer to whatever it is we're doing in life is more, 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 more. The ideology of more, more, more is the ideology of the cancer cell, not of life. Studies have not found that working harder leads to more happiness or success. Here's the thing to think about. What if instead we did less? What if we gave ourselves space to think? If you gave yourself time during your week to think, really think about what it is you're meant to be doing, would you be better off or worse off? At the moment, I'm trying to work on an idea of exceptionalism. I'm fascinated by the difference between things that are exceptional and things that are average. And one of the things that's caught my attention at the moment is donuts. As you can tell by looking at me, I don't eat donuts. And thank you for that. Anyway, so I typically don't eat donuts. I'm not a donut guy. It would never cross my mind to walk into a shop and order a donut. I never have a donut craving, really. Not into donuts. But once a month, I'll pack my kids into the car and I'll drive an hour. I'll drive 63 kilometers to a gourmet donut shop on Queen West, and I'll spend $4 on a donut. And I don't order one, I order two. And I don't regret a thing. And after I've eaten two $4 donuts, I always go through this mental game. Could I do a third? Sometimes I do. So this raises, I didn't mean to end up thinking about this, but I ended up thinking about this because it raised a question in my head. Why do I, as a non-donut eating, virtually anti-donut person, who would never eat a donut in normal circumstances, why on earth would I drive past 157 other donut selling outlets to Parkdale to drop $4 on a donut? Why would I do that? The answer has something to do with exceptionalism. This store don't bake cookies, they will not make you a sandwich, and they don't open crazy hours. All they do is donuts. They're not open at 6 in the morning. They're open at 9 or 10 or whenever. And they're not open late at night. They close at 5 or 6 or sometimes earlier, depending on when they sell out. All they do is donuts, and they're exceptional at what they do. Why? Because they have given themselves space to think about what it is they do. No thoughts are devoted to sandwiches or cookies. 100% of their brain is not taken up with being open ridiculously long hours. They just do one thing, and they do it exceptional. And exceptionalism pays. I wouldn't give you 99 cents for a donut, but I'll happily give you $12 for 3. Exceptionalism pays. In an age of distraction that we're now living in, the opportunities belong to those who can focus. And focus starts with rest. So Jesus looks around at this crowd, these people whose heads are so full, who have so little space going on between their ears because they've filled it with 39 sections and subsections of rules and regulations about what you can and can't do on this day, and they're so full of all that they can't see this thing in front of them, this one obvious thing that needs to get done. And so consequently, the emotions in this sentence are bad. Jesus is angry. Jesus is deeply distressed. Jesus he's pulling his hair out at these people and what they've done to their own lives. Too full, too much going on. They just don't get it. So where are we in the story? What are we missing? What thoughts are we not having? What ideas are we not getting? What simple, obvious solutions are we just not seeing? Because we are too busy with what's already going on in our heads, 75% of which is probably nonsense and unnecessary. God wants you to rest better. Not to do more, but to do less. Maybe to do the less better, but to do less nonetheless. What are you missing out on by being so desperately busy so much of the time? I'll take questions in a moment, but curious phrase we use when someone escapes from prison: they're on the run, they're on the run, they're on the run. Life feels like this for us too, doesn't it? On the run. On the run. Never quite getting caught, but always on the run. Any questions? Yes?
So I mentioned there's a donut store that's called On the Run. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Gina?
What about those people who don't have a choice?
I don't understand. I don't have a choice to.
Well, some people have to put in more hours, work harder, longer, just to make ends meet.
Yes. Okay, so we actually have really detailed information on this thanks to a thing called the American Time Use Survey. So every year I think it's the Department of Labor Statistics or whatever it is, does detailed research in how people in North America spend their time. And what that research consistently shows is that people work typically 40 hours a week, sleep typically for 56, and typically waste extraordinarily large amounts of time. For example, the average young person will spend 2.5 hours a day being distracted by some kind of mobile screen. 2.5 hours a day times 7, that's quite a significant amount of time. The average North American spends 4.5 hours a day watching television. You times that by 7, that really adds up. So I think the issue, I'll just talk for myself, I won't talk for any of you. We say that we have no time. The research suggests that's actually not true. We have 160 hours a week. And we sleep for 56 of them, we work for roughly 40 of them, that leaves 72 hours, quite a large amount of time. It's not that we have no time, the issue seems to be that we're pretty bad at managing the time we have, and we're really efficient at wasting it. Really efficient. And we fill it, ironically, with things that aren't just unimportant, they're unimportant to us. Like no one is going to stand up at my funeral and say, one of the things I really admired about Darren was that his text response time was on point. No one's, why would anyone want that to be their said of them, Or one of the things I really appreciated about him was, he was really up to date with Facebook. Take Facebook as I know I sound like a grumpy old man, and I'm really just a grumpy middle-aged man. Facebook, right? So I'm friends on Facebook with people who I was in school with in Scotland. So these are not high-value relationships for me. They are not. I haven't seen these people in 30 years. Yeah, 30 years. Why do I care about what you had for dinner last night? It's not a high-value relationship. But the irony is, I could spend time maintaining these very low-value relationships and have no time for real friends. Like real friends with flesh and blood and stuff. So much of that is true. How, I enjoy watching TV as much as the next guy, but how important is it and how refreshing is it to just watch mindless hours of television and yet say I don't have time to hang out with a buddy or, to learn something I always wanted to learn, So, I get the busyness thing. I get it. Hey, this is a GTA. We are busy addicted. Busy addicted. And I think the studies on busyness that have been done in America, I think they would be even more pronounced here in the GTA. This is nuts. Up here. How we live and what we do, it's nuts. But I maintain that if we're too busy on the wrong things, we do ourselves a disservice. And I have a hunch that the answer is not doing more faster. It's doing less, but more focused and better. Exceptionalism pays off. Lots of average is just average. That was a rambling answer, I'm sorry. Okay, one more.
I think a lot of us say we use that excuse because we really don't have the answers to what our problems are. For instance, a lot of individuals think that reaching a certain level in finance or in occupation will change their life. And once they get there, they realize it wasn't gonna make them, it didn't make them any happier, it just actually kept them, it takes more time to away from what they enjoyed before. And so I hear the same thing, even myself, I say I'm busy, but I can tell you there's hours that I'll spend playing poker on my phone, because I don't want to face the game or the problem that I have to, overcome, we'll say.
Well, I can tell you why you spend hours playing poker on your phone.
Tell me,
Would you like me to tell you?
please.
Did you all hear that? So the thing was, I spent hours playing poker on my phone, and instead of focusing on what I'm meant to be focusing on. The reason for this is our brains have a novelty bias.
Okay.
So there are two parts of our brain. There's the prefrontal cortex, which helps us focus, and we have a thing called our limbic system, which craves novelty. And our brain, thousands of years ago, novelty was useful. So I'm on a hunt for a mammoth, right? Ooh, I've got a club and a spear, and I'm looking for a mammoth. I don't know where I'm getting this analogy from. And so there's a part of my brain needs to focus on this task. But I need to be aware of novelty, because novelty might give me an even fatter mammoth over there that I didn't notice. And it might make me aware of danger. So there's this part of our brain that's kind of into novelty, really useful when we're hunting mammoths, not useful anymore. This part of the brain is the exact part of the brain that a Las Vegas slot machine is designed to activate. It gives us a sort of, it gives us a chemical drug in our brain reward. It's the same part of our brain that activates when we get a text message, a Facebook notification, Candy Crush. How many of you play Candy Crush and treat that as a reward? I'll focus for 10 minutes and I'll just give myself a quick game of Candy Crush. How is that actually a reward? It's a reward because your brain is just fighting against you, and it's your own worst enemy. So there's a trick to fixing that, and I don't have time to tell you about it, unfortunately. So we need to leave. We're 7 minutes late. Sorry. Thank you for coming. God bless you. See you next Sunday.
Now what?